Connor Bedard was in Toronto on Monday, and Chicago getting a win over Toronto. No hat trick for Austin Matthews. He got back-to-back hat tricks in the first two games of the year. I want to talk about Connor Bedard. I know he didn't get a point in that Monday game, but I'm really fascinated with the discussion that's starting to brew around him with regards to the media access and availability, or lack thereof in the case of Toronto, where he wasn't available on the morning of game day and post game. And Taylor Hall spoke about some of the coverage around him too, basically saying it's starting to get a little bit much. And I'm just curious about how you feel about all of that. Like, are we at a point where we are covering this player too much, or not as much, or how do you feel we're handling that?
Well, I don't think he's being covered too much. I mean, look at the early returns, right? The first game on ESPN, his NHL debut in Pittsburgh, set records for them. I think if you look at impressions and things online, like I think there's a huge amount of interest in Connor Bedard, but I do think that there's a conversation to be had about what the NHL can do, what the Blackhawks PR team can do or management team in order to protect him. And I think that they're still finding their way. I mean, look, you're talking about a player who just turned 18. He was 17 when he was drafted by Chicago at the end of June. And, I have to say, I mean, he's extremely agreeable as a media interview subject. I mean, if you think back to the World Juniors last year when he was having 6 points a game and became this massive story, he was speaking every day. I know early in his career here, just this first week and a half, he's done everything asked of him. He's been mic'd up in a game. He's doing after period interviews, after game interviews with the rights holder broadcasters, in addition to the sort of normal media availability with the reporters in those markets. And so, I don't think there's certainly nothing. I don't think there's any criticism to be levied whatsoever in his direction. Where you get some noise is that he came to Toronto, where there is a big media market here, with my colleagues, and doesn't speak at all before the game on Monday. The Blackhawks did practice in Toronto on Sunday afternoon, and he spoke then. But I think reporters are accustomed to coming to the arena on game day and getting a chance to speak to someone like this, especially this will be Connor Bedard's only visit to Scotiabank Arena this year. And I think that there's some people that are sour about that. Now, let's lay everything on the table here. I'm a vice president with the Professional Hockey Writers Association, so I'm not, any comment I have on this isn't meant to represent the writers generally, or even the writers in Toronto, even though I was there for the game. This is my personal opinion. I can understand what Chicago's doing. Like, you might not like it selfishly because maybe you had a story in mind that day and you wanted some comments, or you wanted to get a little bit more color around what's going on or context. But I can understand to a degree. First of all, Chicago wasn't at the rink on Monday morning. Like, their team wasn't there. So there's no pregame avail in that regard. I guess they could have maybe had reporters sometimes, depending on what availabilities are. Sometimes you go to a team hotel and the player or coach or manager might be made available in that setting. And then, in the game itself, it was the first NHL game of Connor Bedard's very young career. He didn't have a point. And I think the PR staff wanted to highlight the players that were part of a big win for their team. And so he didn't speak. I do understand wanting to shield him. I really do. But, let's face it, the story on October 16th in Toronto wasn't about a 4-1 win for Chicago. It was about, this player playing a game in that market. And then, part of that wasn't told. And so, I don't know how you feel about this, Julian. I personally can't get that fired up about it, but it's probably because I'm an older guy now. I've just seen enough. I heard a lot of my colleagues, in the press box last night saying, like, in the NBA, this wouldn't happen, like that LeBron James speaks every day, or, I know the Spurs have a first overall pick that I guess is pretty personable. I don't follow the sport enough to you might know a little bit more about that, but
Victor Wembanyama, like he's like, to not to kind of hijack it, but like Connor Bedard is seen as like a generational prospect in the NHL. Victor Wembanyama is seen as a generational prospect in the NBA. And I don't know what the media coverage is specifically with his availabilities in San Antonio, but like, we were seeing this dude everywhere before he was getting drafted, and the coverage around him was pretty normal, expected. I mean, this dude's like 7'5". This dude
Right.
is going to do crazy things in the NBA for years to come. So I think when the Connor Bedard stuff was kind of coming around, I saw a lot of people be critical in the fact that we're seeing other leagues hype up prospects and the media attention around them is swarming. And then in the NHL, we have players who are saying, no, we don't want that for this kid. And I've seen some people say that, oh, well, that's just why the NHL's mentality is what it is and why it's second rate. And I don't know. There's like a part of me that looks at Connor and acknowledges that he's a teenager. He's barely 18. And it's a lot to handle all of those microphones in your face and to do all these media availabilities. But it seems like he is, as you said, doing everything that's being asked of him and going above and beyond. Like, I didn't think he'd be on a show like the Pat McAfee show, to be quite honest with you. At the same time, though, like he has to go through that coverage. Everyone who's been in that position has had something like that, especially with the talent that he has.
Well, and everyone's looking at it a different way, right? Like the Toronto media or some members of it are probably looking at it like this is his one day here this season. Like this is the story. Like this is their thing. Whereas I'm sure the Blackhawks PR team, keep in mind, this team has yet to play a home game yet this year. They've been on the road since, last Monday, which is a long time away, and dealing with a lot of stuff. They're looking at like, how do we manage this one day for this kid? Like, how can we maybe make it a little better? And here's the truth for those that haven't been in our roles, Julian, like it is not uncommon for reporters that cover a team on a daily basis to almost make kind of deals with the team in the sense that like players that are in high demand, it might be like, okay, you speak to them today, but tomorrow will be an off day, or, like that kind of thing happens. When the Leafs had Matthews and Marner and Nylander all play as rookies, Lou Lamoriello was a general manager that season. They had a rule that those players couldn't go on the broadcast. They couldn't do those after period interviews you see, or the over the board interviews. They were restricted. The Leafs actually still have that rule for their rookies. It's not as big a deal now with respect to Matthew Knies and Fraser Minton, but they don't have the kind of rookies that maybe were in the kind of demand, especially, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner were. Matthews scored 4 goals in his first game and didn't do an interview until after the game was done. He didn't do anything special with the broadcast, for example. And so that's how the Leafs managed at the time. I don't think this is anything new what Chicago's doing. I don't think it was anything personal against the Toronto media in this case. I think really it's more a fact that they went through Pittsburgh and everything that was opening night. They played back-to-back in Boston. They went to Montreal. They had a practice day there. He was available there. They had Saturday hockey night in Canada in Montreal, all the exposure that comes with that. They came to Toronto on the Sunday. He was available then. Taylor Hall spoke to the media. Donato, Luke Richardson, the head coach of the Blackhawks. And it got to Monday, and I think they were like, uncle, because of everything they'd been through leading up to that. And so I think it was more a collision of things than any malice. And look, I'm not going to tell any of my colleagues, they can be critical of Chicago or Connor Bedard if they wish. I mean, it's all fair game in the fishbowl, but I'm just saying personally, and I'm not speaking for anybody, I don't think it's really that big a deal. He is 18. It's a tough start. Like, I don't think, as much as I was hyping this up like 2 weeks ago before the season started, like, how crazy is this start to his career? The more I've thought about it, it's really a difficult thing. What the schedule makers handed Chicago and Connor Bedard. And so I think they're managing it as best they can. And so that's sort of my piece on it. I'm sure I'm going to have some of our colleagues like, come fight for us. We need this access. And I would love the access. I mean, I was there in the dressing room last night, hoping that Connor Bedard would speak, but I can understand how they got to the point where he didn't.
By the way, with that schedule, I keep saying this, they go through all of those games: Boston, Pittsburgh, Montreal, Toronto, Colorado caps off that road trip, and their very first game at home against Vegas. Like, that is not an easy stretch to start. I appreciate it for the media standpoint. It is not an easy stretch for Connor Bedard.
Well, and I think the game in Colorado is at like 8:30 at night too, or something. Like, it's like a weird start time, and they fly back and they land at 4 a.m. and then they're playing like before they play that Vegas game. I mean, look, and I'll say this, Chicago's actually had, for what we expect of that team, a pretty strong start to the year. I know internally Nick Foligno gave a little speech after they were losing in Montreal saying, like, let's finish this road trip, above 500, 3-2. So they're 2-2 going into the game in Colorado. They got a chance to do that. I mean, that's what's interesting to me honestly, probably the most interesting thing that happened in the last 48 hours is that Taylor Hall, unprompted to the reporters after their practice, mentioned that Bedard's doing too many interviews and too many in-game things. And, that came from obviously a player who's played in the Canadian market, who was a former first overall pick, a former Hart Trophy winner, someone who's been around the league a few spins, and frankly, who was acquired by Chicago to be a mentor to Connor Bedard, along with guys like Nick Foligno and Corey Perry. I mean, they brought Taylor Hall in. Boston had a cap situation in the offseason, and the Blackhawks took the opportunity to bring him in because of all he's been through, and I think the way he can be a leader. And so I wonder if some of the conversation now is being driven from the bottom up versus, management or even, the PR staff saying we have to manage this. I mean, maybe it's the players themselves that are saying, like, let's give Connor a break here. And water will find its level. I mean, first of all, if you play 5 road games out of the gate, now you're going to have a steady diet at home at some point. And I think that he'll be a little less novel around the league. Like, he will have been everywhere. And you get it now. Like, I know Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin and even Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, these guys, Connor McDavid do tons of interviews and they'd still have demands on them. But I think it's more normal to see them and they do get some more days off. And I think that will come in time for Bedard here. But, it's kind of intriguing. It's a new media world too. There's more things that he could be doing. You're seeing a lot of the content roll out that was done at the media tour in Vegas, whether he's on a couch with Colby Armstrong or talking to Sidney Crosby on ESPN. And, it's been a lot. I think it's fair to maybe want to pull back a little bit. And who knows, maybe a nice byproduct for it is pissing off the Toronto media. I know everyone outside Toronto, Toronto loves to pick, or the rest of the league loves to pick on Toronto.